My name is Bakel Lickman. I'm Vice President of Programming for the Board of Trustees. And I'd like to first thank you all for coming out this evening. I'm looking out and I see several faces. This is our third program in the past few days, so it's been a busy week, so thank you for coming out again. But I'd like to extend extra special warm welcome to our guest speaker, Dr. Nathan Katz. Before we begin, I'd like to just go over a couple of quick things. Please take a moment to silence your cell phones. Also, if you did not have an opportunity before the program, there are books available for sale in the vestibule behind the sanctuary here. So we invite you to purchase your books, and afterwards, Dr. Katz will do a book signing in Wilson Auditorium, and there will also be some refreshments. For those of you who don't know, this past year, Temple Israel celebrated its 90th anniversary. That's 90 years of providing a spiritual home for countless Jews here in Miami, and we're especially proud of our long history of social action and our efforts in supporting equality for all people. And we're very proud of our full and diverse calendar as well. I'm not sure if you visited our website, but we have, my goodness, we have, of course, worship opportunities here, Shabbat services on Friday evenings, Saturday mornings, learning opportunities with Rabbi Hein and our scholar residence, Rabbi Shefetz. We have a very vibrant and active sisterhood, Central Havarah, and Ruach, our LGBT Havarah. And later this month, we are going to host a weekend residence with Wyla. And if you don't know, Wyla is a very, very talented hip-hop artist. Silence. Well, very talented. He uses religion and social issues and politics to create this really beautiful music. And he happens to also be, of course, Jewish, Black, and gay. I thought that I was the only one, but apparently not. So it's going to be a really exciting weekend, and that is February 14th here at Temple Israel. He'll be here February 14th. He'll participate in our Shabbat service on February 15th, and a really amazing concert on the 16th. And I want to acknowledge some of our sponsors, and that's first Next at 19th, as well as FIU's program in the spirituality department. So please check out our website for more information. Now, this past year we had two very exciting things. I mentioned one, and that's the 90th anniversary. But we also welcomed Temple Israel's spiritual leader, Rabbi Thomas Hein, last month. Breath of fresh air, and he has done a great job with connecting to so many members in a very short period of time, and I'm very hopeful that with this partnership that we will be here for many, many, many years to come. Now, raise your hand if you have a direct line to the Dalai Lama. All right, well, I know at least one person. So we're really excited. This has been a program that we've been planning now for about 6 months now. So Dr. Katz, Dr. Nathan Katz, who brought the Dalai Lama to Miami 3 times, is the author of 15 books, including the National Jewish Book Award finalist, Who Are the Jews of India, and memoir, Spiritual Journey Home. He is a Florida International University research professor in the School of International and Public Affairs, the Bhagwan Mahavir Professor of Jain Studies, the academic director of the Jewish Museum of Florida at FIU, and director of the program in the study of spirituality, which is co-sponsoring not just the program tonight, but the next several programs we have. This particular program is a part of what we're calling the Jewish So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Nathan Katz.
Thank you all for coming out. I know I have an inside line, so I know how busy this temple has been the past weekend or so. So I really appreciate that many of you came back. Yeah, maybe it's your fourth time in 4 days, something like that, to hear the talk. And I see some FIU friends of mine, I see some other friends, some people I don't know, a lot of Temple Israel people, and just delighted. And I know that everyone has heard this. I know it's a subtitle for your Jewish spirituality series. I'm spiritual, but not religious. According to a recent survey by the Pew Group, almost a quarter of all Americans describe themselves with those words, spiritual, but not religious. And the last time that kind of survey was taken 10 years ago, that was not even one of the possible responses. So this spiritual but not religious, whatever it means, and I hope to shed some light on that, is something very new in our culture, and something that's growing remarkably quickly, and is almost taking over the religious landscape of our country. So a lot of people are no longer identifying, according to traditional faiths, with spirituality. And sort of from the other side, if you follow recent discoveries in books and news, you may have read about this mega collider in Switzerland that discovered this Higgs boson particle, which is described as the God particle. Now, I don't know very much physics at all, but very roughly, when this particle comes into existence for an instant, a tiny, tiny moment of time, somehow or other, and this is as much mysticism to me as it is physics, it introduces mass into the world. So until this particle makes its very brief appearance, there's just formlessness, and when that particle comes in for a split second, it's as though it distillates the cosmos, and we have mass, weight, we have, in fact, a universe. So no wonder, our biblical account, as you know, there was nothing, everything was unformed, total, global, and suddenly a universe appears. And according to this cosmological physics theory, that's what in fact happened, and that's what they call the God particle. On the other side of the scale, last year there was a New York Times best-selling book called The God Gene, which tries to answer the question, why do some people seem to be more religious and more spiritual and others less? Is that entirely attributable to heredity, or to environment, or so forth? And the theory behind that book is, yes, there are, and I'll explain this a little more in the talk, there are certain structures in the brain that are inheritable that give us a predisposition towards spirituality. And that shorthand for that is the God gene. So, whether we go very far out to the edges of the physical universe, or very deep inside to the structure of our brain itself, very tough-minded scientists are discovering there's something they call God. So, science is discovering spirituality, and what I want to tell you also is that spirituality is discovering science. That's part of what's going on. Now, the separation between spirituality and religion that most people very easily know, I'm spiritual and not religious, it rolls off the tongue. It's common parlance. I want to say that makes sense. And I have three grounds for my belief. And the first is for historical reasons, which I will tell you. The second is for psychological research psychology issues, which I will tell you. And the third is from what we've been learning in neuroscience, which to me, as someone who knows very little but is very exciting, this is the most fascinating breakthrough field that there is. If I were young, I would try to be a neuroscientist. Just the most remarkable things that they're discovering. So, history, psychology, neuroscience. First, my historical approach. Now, you will see yoga, for example, everywhere. If you go to a gym, they'll tell you they teach kickboxing, and they teach weight training, and they teach Zumba, and they teach yoga. Yoga is a kind of exercise, right? And it is no more, in most people's minds, religious than are kickboxing or Zumba. Now, once upon a time, yoga was considered one of the 6 orthodox forms of Hinduism. Its texts are written in Sanskrit. Its text makes reference to terminologies, concepts, and language that all of the different religious movements in India do. Yoga was part of Hinduism. And what happened was, at some point, probably about 150 years ago, when Swami Vivekananda came to this country in 1893, his birthday was just this week, 150th birthday, so I mentioned it. Began to try to find a way to teach yoga as a practice for its obvious health and psychological benefits. So, it took what was traditionally an 8-step system of spiritual discipline, if some of you are yogis and yoginis, the Ashtanga system, and took the 4th of those limbs, the 4th of those angas, that is known as Hatha Yoga, which is the postures, and they connected that to the next anga, the 5th, which is breathing, and that's what they teach. And then that was through Vivekananda, many other teachers, Paramahansa Yogananda, some names you might not know, it doesn't matter, sold it, packaged it, marketed in first the United States and then Europe as a totally secular system. So what you get is something that undoubtedly was a religious system with beliefs and rituals and so forth and practices, and separated it from the religion, or I would say secularized a spiritual practice. That's an important metaphor. And even today, there are many in the Hindu world who are very distressed about this, that they feel there is some kind of cultural imperialism to take something from their culture, denude it of all reference to India and Hinduism, and teach it in isolation from that context. And a lot of Hindus get very upset with this. On the other hand, a lot of schools teach it in a secular form, and then some of the conservative Christian people get upset about that because they think it's religious, and yoga is right in the middle of this controversy on all sides. But that is the secularized spirituality. Second example is Sufism. Maybe you've come to some of our programs, I hope you have, where we have Sufi whirling, dancing, poetry, and music. Maybe some of you have practiced the recitation of the divine names from the Quran, the practice of dhikr. Perhaps one way or another you've encountered Sufism. Well, Sufism is Islamic mysticism. It is a beautiful system of art, and it stresses the heart connection to God, the love of God. The symbol of Sufism is the winged heart. And to be a Sufi, the requirements were you must be an observant, knowledgeable Muslim, and then you did Sufism in addition. Just as in traditional Kabbalah, to practice Kabbalah, you had to be a knowledgeable, observant, married male, to add a couple more, in order to study Kabbalah as a way of interpreting your normative practice. So, Sufism grows up in Islam, and then Islam goes to India with its unique religious climate. And there is one 12th century fellow named Muhammad Chishti who lived in a town called Ajmer. And there are many Hindus around who are interested in the beautiful chanting the Muslims did, the Sufis did, the kinds of meditation they practiced, their chants, their whirling. And Chishti said, that's all right, they can come and practice Sufism. And there's no need for them to become Muslims first. Sufism is a series of practices that are available, and he accepted Hindus to be his followers while remaining Hindus. And this, my friends, was an absolutely revolutionary thing to do. No one had thought that before. Sufism is part of Islam, but not for Muhammad Chishti. For him, it was its own freestanding spiritual system, and so Sufism gets secularized, just as did yoga. And another great figure was Jalaluddin Rumi, 100 years or so later after Chishti, who was a Persian Sufi who went to Turkey, and in Turkey he found a multi-religious environment with Christians and Jews, and he cemented relationships by taking on Christian and Jewish disciples to practice Sufism while remaining Christians or Jews. So there we are. We have a secularized Sufism. Today, there are unknown thousands of people, many here in South Florida, who would say, in all seriousness, I am a Sufi, but I am not a Muslim. It's its own practice. Third example is mindfulness. Now, I don't know if there are any psychologists in the room, but yeah, there. So mindfulness is probably part of your repertoire of therapeutic devices, especially for addictive behavior, anger management, many things. This technique of observing one's mind and observing one's emotions and thoughts has become deeply useful in psychotherapy. However, mindfulness is a Buddhist meditation system devised by the Buddha himself 2,500 years ago. And in the 19th century, was repackaged by Burmese Buddhist monks to sort of simplify whatever was cumbersome about the system so that more people could practice mindfulness meditation. And then in the early 1950s, soon after Burma became independent from Britain, they wanted to develop a uniquely Buddhist culture. So the Prime Minister, a gentleman named U Nu, commissioned some monks to develop a system for mindfulness meditation, especially geared to modern times and to lay people. That is the system of traditional Buddhist meditation that's taught globally today. And then just as an incident, a coincidence to this, is that among the other leaders of newly independent countries with whom U Nu developed a very close relationship was David Ben-Gurion. And in fact, you may not know, Ben-Gurion spent some months in northern Burma studying this meditation technique. And the relationship between Israel and Burma have always been very, very close. So, what we call mindfulness, that is, most psychologists use it in their practice, totally secular form of introspection, was once very much contained within the Buddhist cognitive world. Mindfulness is a secularized Buddhist technique. And one more example is Kabbalah, of course. Now, as I mentioned, Kabbalah is esoteric Judaism, and to practice an esoteric tradition means very few people will do it, whether by self-selection, because of its rigors, or because there are barriers put up to its practice. And the Kabbalists said to read these, to understand the system, to do its meditations, to do its practices, you must be, as mentioned, of course, Jewish, at least 40 years old, married, and a male. And more important, knowledgeable about Torah, Talmud, fully observant. So, not many people could have access to Kabbalah. The Hasidic movement arose in part by trying to make Kabbalah more accessible to the masses, but the Hasidic movement itself retained many of those same barriers about for Jewish people only, certain age, certain gender, certain level of observance. But then in the last century, Rabbi Yehuda Ashlag came along and said, no, I have a different interpretation. And that, in fact, for us to bring the Messiah speedily to this world, we must teach this knowledge, not to Jews in particular, but to all people. And Rabbi Ashar began teaching Kabbalah to anyone who would come by. And his disciple was a gentleman named Rabbi Philip Berg, who was quite an entrepreneur, if you know of him. And he founded these Kabbalah centers. And they're everywhere. They are outreach to the nth degree. Radio broadcasts, radio advertisements to come and study Kabbalah. I don't know how many people, Gentiles who I visited, said, look at this, Dr. Katz, I have a whole set of the Kabbalah. You know, I paid $3,000 for this set of Kabbalah. I didn't ask if they could read it because it's in Aramaic. And it wasn't the point, it became a kind of amulet. But Kabbalah became secularized also. And Madonna can say, again, in all seriousness, I'm a Kabbalist, but certainly not Jewish. So you see the pattern in yoga, Sufism, mindfulness, and Kabbalah. One little point about Kabbalah I want to make too. Some years ago, maybe about 7 years ago or so, FIU honored Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz with an honorary doctorate. And Rabbi Steinsaltz is one of the most prolific, wise teachers in our tradition of the past century. Time magazine called him, a little bit of hyperbole, the rabbi of the millennium century, maybe millenniums might be pushing. But he also has done a great deal of work on Kabbalah. So I was able to spend some time with him, and I just asked him, what do you think of these Kabbalah centers? Now, Rabbi Steinsaltz, I don't know if you ever know much about it, he's an assertive guy. He says exactly what he thinks in no uncertain terms. And he said, I'll tell you what I think. This pop Kabbalah, as he called it, is to real Kabbalah as pornography is to love. That took, I had to digest that one for a while. But I came to see his point. Pornography is about one's own erotic sensations. Love also involves the erotic, but is directed towards the other. Right? So whereas pornography is self-isolating, whereas pornography is all about oneself, love is quite the opposite. It is always, first and foremost, about the other, or should be. So too, Rabbi Steinsaltz was saying, this kind of pop Kabbalah is all about one's own feelings, one's own spiritual highs, and the like, and one's own exercise of power sometimes, because there's a magical element as well. Whereas Kabbalah traditionally practices all a way of serving and worshiping God. It is entirely other-directed, whereas pop spirituality, not just Kabbalah, this holds for all of them, is self-directed. So I'm describing a process of secularization. Once upon a time, of course, spirituality was part and parcel, was packaged in the world's religious traditions. So yoga is Hindu, Kabbalah is Jewish, etc., etc., etc. But they parted ways, and this has happened before. There's a very famous article by Sigmund Freud called One of the Great Difficulties in Psychoanalysis. Dr. Freud was probably about as modest a person as Rabbi Steinsaltz, I think, because in his article, he said there have been 3 great discoveries in the history of humanity. One was when Galileo discovered that the Earth is not the center of the universe. And that was a great blow to our collective egoism. The Bible teaches we're the center, we're what's important. The center is not just a physical location, but a whole locus of meanings and so forth. And now astronomy is saying, no, you're not the center. Your world is not the center. In fact, you're rather in a distant part of the Milky Way, and so on and so on and so on. So we got, whereas cosmology, our maps of the universe, were once contained within various religious traditions. Now, with this Copernicus. His discovery was secularizing astronomy, cosmology. That was the first. The second, wrote Freud, was Darwin. And of course, traditional religion teaches that we as humans are entirely distinct from other forms of life. We have, either we have a soul and they don't, or more accurately, we have a more complex soul than they have. But we are in principle different from animal life. And in fact, that's emphasized. We were created on a different day from the rest of nature, right, in the biblical account of creation. And humans are the crown of creation, it's called. We alone are created in the image of God. But of course, what Darwin came along and said, or at least his followers said he said, was that no, in fact, we are the product of a still evolving system of selective mutations, and we're more adapted to survive in the world the way things are. So we have evolved to this. We share the same stuff, the same lineage, the same family tree as animals. So our uniqueness as biological humans was overturned, said Freud, by the Darwinian revolution. The third revolution, of course, was his. I'm sure you can anticipate I was going there. He said, and we always thought that consciousness was the center of the mind. And he says, my approaches to psychoanalysis, to the unconscious, shows that there are forces within our minds that we don't even know about, unconscious. And they, in fact, are what drive consciousness. So even our conscious, rational self is not the center of our mind. The center of our mind is some dark undercurrent of unconsciousness. So psychology breaks off from religion. First, astronomy breaks off from religion, cosmology. And then biology breaks off from religion in the creation ideas of Darwin. And now modern psychology, says Freud, breaks off from religion as well. And all of these fields, astronomy, cosmology, biology, classification, psychology, these were all part of religion, but they all became secularized. I'm suggesting now that the same pattern adheres when we look at spirituality, that at least for some folks, spirituality is, or what that person means when they say I'm spiritual but not religious, is that spirituality is a secularized version of what was once religious. This is secularization or modernization, and they all go hand in hand with globalization, because one thing that happens, once you cut yoga free from its Hindu moorings, what happens is it becomes acceptable and accepted globally. So I say every gym has yoga classes. The same thing with Sufism or Kabbalah or mindfulness, when they become separated from the religions in which was their original home, they can go anywhere in the globe without what they see as